The winter wind howled through the Colorado mountains, with such fury that Blake Irons could barely see his own hand in front of his face as he trudged through knee-deep snow toward his cabin. The year was 1878, and this late November storm had come down from the peaks without warning, blanketing everything in white within hours. Blake had been checking his trap lines when the weather turned, and now all he wanted was to get inside, stoke his fire, and wait out the blizzard with a pot of coffee and maybe some of the venison stew he had cooking in his Dutch oven. He was a solitary man, 32 years old, broad-shouldered and bearded, with dark hair that fell past his collar and eyes the color of slate. He had chosen this life of isolation after the war had taken too much from him, after he had seen things no man should see, after he had lost people he could never replace. The mountains did not judge him for his nightmares or his silences. They simply existed, harsh and beautiful and honest. When he finally reached his cabin, stomping snow from his boots on the covered porch, something made him pause. Call it instinct or intuition, but Blake had learned to trust that prickling sensation at the back of his neck. He looked around carefully, scanning the clearing where his cabin sat, but saw nothing unusual through the curtain of falling snow. His mule, Steady Old Buck, was in the small barn, sheltered and fed. Everything appeared normal. Still, the feeling persisted. Blake went inside and shook off his heavy coat, hanging it on the peg by the door. The fire in his hearth had burned down to embers, and he busied himself building it back up, adding logs until flames licked hungrily at the wood. The cabin warmed quickly. It was a single large room with his bed in one corner, a table and chairs, shelves lined with supplies, and his few possessions hung on the walls or stored in the trunk at the foot of his bed. He had built it himself 3 years ago when he first came to these mountains outside of Fairplay, Colorado. It was solid and tight, and it had kept him alive through 2 hard winters already. He checked his stew, which needed more water, and that was when he remembered he had used the last of what he had hauled up from the creek that morning. He would need to go down to his root cellar where he kept a barrel of water along with his preserved goods and vegetables. The cellar was outside, accessed by a slanted door set into the ground about 20 feet from the cabin. Blake grabbed a bucket and his lantern and headed back into the storm. The wind tried to tear the cellar door from his hands when he pulled it open. He descended the rough wooden steps carefully, holding the lantern high. The cellar was about 8 feet deep and perhaps 10 feet square, lined with shelves holding jars of preserves, sacks of potatoes and turnips, and the water barrel he kept filled from the creek. It smelled of earth and vegetables and the cold stone foundation. He had just set his bucket down when he heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible sound, breathing. Not his own. Blake froze, his hand moving instinctively to the knife at his belt. He raised the lantern higher, and that was when he saw her. She was huddled in the far corner behind the water barrel, pressed against the earthen wall as if she could disappear into it. A woman, young, with long dark hair tangled and dirty, wearing a dress that had once been blue but was now torn and stained with mud and what looked like blood. Her eyes were enormous in her thin face, reflecting the lantern light like a cornered animal. She was shaking, whether from cold or fear Blake could not tell. Probably both. For a long moment neither of them moved. Blake could see she was terrified, and he slowly raised his free hand in what he hoped was a calming gesture. He kept his voice low and steady. "Easy now. I am not going to hurt you." The woman pressed herself harder against the wall, and he could see she was trying to make herself smaller, invisible. Her lips were blue with cold, and her hands were wrapped around her knees, fingers white where they gripped her own arms. "How long have you been down here?" Blake asked, still keeping his voice gentle. The cellar was cold, but at least it was sheltered from the wind. Still, she would freeze to death eventually if she stayed here. She did not answer, just watched him with those huge, frightened eyes. Blake noticed she was younger than he had first thought, perhaps 23 or 24, though it was hard to tell under the dirt and fear. He also noticed the bruises on her arms, the swelling on one side of her face, the way she held herself as if any sudden movement might shatter her. "I am Blake," he said. "This is my cabin, my root cellar. You are on my land, but that does not matter right now. What matters is getting you warm before you freeze. Will you come up to the cabin with me?" She shook her head violently, and a small sound escaped her throat, something between a whimper and a sob. Blake felt something twist in his chest. He had seen fear before, plenty of it, but there was something about this woman's terror that affected him deeply. "All right," he said softly. "All right, you do not have to come up yet, but at least tell me your name, please." For a long moment he thought she would not answer. Then, in a voice so hoarse and raw it sounded like it had been scraped over gravel, she whispered, "Fiona." "Fiona," Blake repeated, nodding. "That is a good name. Fiona, I need to know, are you hurt? Besides the cold, I mean." She stared at him, and he could see her trying to decide whether to trust him. Finally, she gave a small nod. "Bad hurt, or can it wait until you are warm?" Another pause. "It can wait," she whispered. Blake nodded. "All right. I am going to fill this bucket with water, and then I am going to go back to my cabin. I will leave the cellar door open just a crack so you know you can come up whenever you are ready. There is hot stew and a fire. No one is going to hurt you, Fiona. I promise you that." He moved slowly toward the water barrel, giving her as wide a berth as the small space allowed. He could feel her eyes tracking his every movement. When he dipped the bucket into the barrel, he noticed his hands were shaking slightly. Something about this situation had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. As he started back toward the stairs, Fiona suddenly spoke again, her voice still barely above a whisper. "They killed my family." Blake stopped, turning to look at her. Even in the dim lantern light, he could see the tears streaming down her face now, cutting tracks through the dirt on her cheeks. "They came at night 3 weeks ago," she continued, the words tumbling out now as if a dam had broken. "Men with guns. They wanted our land, the water rights. My father said no, said we had papers, legal claim. They did not care. They shot him right there in our yard. They shot my mother when she screamed. My brother tried to fight them." Her voice broke. He was only 16. Blake felt his own eyes burning, his throat tight. He had to swallow hard before he could speak. "Your brother. They killed him too," Fiona whispered. "I hid. I climbed into the loft of our barn and I hid in the hay and I listened to them kill my family and burn our house. I hid like a coward while they died." "You survived," Blake said, his voice rough. "That does not make you a coward, that makes you alive." "I have been running for 3 weeks," she continued, as if she had not heard him. "Hiding during the day, moving at night, they are looking for me. They know I got away and they cannot afford to leave a witness. I stole food where I could, slept in barns, in caves. 2 days ago I saw your cabin. I thought it was empty, the way it sits alone up here. I thought I could hide in your cellar, just for a little while, just until I figured out where to go next. But then the storm came and I was too cold to keep moving and I just—" She stopped, her whole body shaking now with sobs. Blake set down his bucket and moved closer slowly, the way he might approach a wounded deer. He knelt a few feet away from her, close enough that she could see his face clearly in the lantern light. "Listen to me, Fiona," he said, and his voice was thick with emotion he had not felt in years. "You are safe now. I do not know who those men were, but they will not get to you here. I promise you that. This mountain is my home, and I know every rock, every tree, every trail. No one comes up here without me knowing about it. You can stay here as long as you need to." "Why?" she asked, looking at him with such raw confusion and pain that Blake felt his heart crack a little. "Why would you help me? You do not even know me." Blake was quiet for a moment, remembering his own sister, sweet Margaret, who had been 22 when Confederate raiders had burned their farm in Missouri. Remembering how he had been away fighting for the Union, how he had come home to find his parents dead and Margaret vanished. He had never found her. Never knew what had happened to her in the end, though his imagination had tormented him with possibilities for years. "Because someone should have helped my sister when she needed it," he said finally, his voice barely steady. "Because you are a human being in trouble and I am a human being who can help. It is as simple as that." Fiona looked at him for a long moment, and Blake could see her trying to decide. He did not push, did not say anything more. He just waited, letting her make her own choice. Finally, she uncurled herself slightly from her defensive position. "The stew," she whispered. "Is there really stew?" Blake felt a small smile tug at his lips. "Venison stew, and it is pretty good if I do say so myself. There is also coffee and bread I baked yesterday." "I have not had a real meal in 3 weeks," Fiona said, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "I am so hungry." "Then let us get you fed," Blake said gently. He stood and offered his hand. Fiona stared at it for a moment, then slowly, hesitantly, reached out and took it. Her hand was ice cold, so small in his own work-roughened palm. He helped her to her feet and she swayed a little, unsteady. He could tell she was weak from hunger and exhaustion. "Can you walk?" She nodded, but when she took a step, her legs nearly gave out. Blake caught her easily, supporting her weight. "All right, we are going to take this slow. Hold on to me." They made their way up the cellar stairs carefully, Blake carrying the lantern in one hand and supporting Fiona with the other. The storm was still raging above ground, and the wind hit them like a wall when they emerged. Fiona gasped and stumbled, and Blake ended up half carrying her the 20 feet to his cabin. He shouldered open the door and got her inside, kicking it shut behind them against the wind. The warmth of the cabin seemed to affect Fiona immediately. She swayed again, and Blake guided her to one of his wooden chairs by the fire. She collapsed into it, shaking violently now as her body began to thaw. Blake knew this was dangerous, knew she needed to warm up slowly. He grabbed a blanket from his bed and wrapped it around her shoulders, then moved to the fire to stir the stew. "Drink this first," he said, pouring hot coffee into a tin cup and adding a little sugar from his precious supply. "Small sips. It will warm you from the inside." Fiona took the cup with trembling hands and raised it to her lips. She closed her eyes as she sipped, and a small sound of pleasure escaped her throat. Blake turned away, busying himself with ladling stew into a bowl. He found himself oddly affected by that sound, by the simple pleasure this woman was taking in something as basic as hot coffee. It reminded him how much he had taken for granted in his own life. He set the bowl of stew in front of her along with a spoon and a chunk of bread. "Eat slowly," he cautioned. "Your stomach is probably not used to much food right now." Fiona nodded and took a small bite of stew, then another. Blake watched as she forced herself to eat slowly when he could tell she wanted to devour it all at once. He poured himself coffee and sat down across from her at the table, giving her space but staying close enough that she would not feel alone. While she ate, Blake studied her more carefully. Under the dirt and fear and exhaustion, he could see she was actually quite beautiful. High cheekbones, a delicate chin, eyes that were a striking shade of green even swollen from crying. Her dark hair fell past her shoulders in tangled waves, but it was more than her physical appearance that drew his attention. There was something about her, a quality he could not quite name. Strength, maybe, though it was buried deep right now under layers of trauma. Spirit. Determination. She had survived 3 weeks alone in the wilderness, hunted and hurt and terrified, and she was still here. That took something special. When she had finished about half the bowl of stew, she set down her spoon and looked at him. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I cannot remember the last time anyone showed me kindness." "You do not need to thank me," Blake said. "When you are ready, you can tell me more about what happened. About these men who are looking for you. For now, you should rest." Fiona nodded, then winced and touched the side of her face where the swelling was worst. Blake frowned. "Let me look at that," he said, standing. He brought the lantern closer and gently tilted her face toward the light. The bruise was several days old, fading from purple to yellow-green, but the swelling suggested there might be damage to the bone beneath. "Does it hurt when you open and close your jaw?" "Some," she admitted. "But I do not think it is broken." "Probably not," Blake agreed. He examined the rest of the visible injuries as clinically as he could. More bruises on her arms, scratches on her hands, and when she moved, he noticed her favoring her left side. "Your ribs," she nodded. "I think one might be cracked. I fell down a ravine about a week ago, trying to get away from some men I thought were following me." Blake felt a flash of anger at the men who had done this, who had made this woman run and hide and hurt herself trying to escape. He tamped it down. Anger would not help her right now. "I have some salve that will help with the bruises, and I can wrap your ribs if you like. It will make breathing easier." Fiona looked uncertain, and Blake understood. She did not know him, had no reason to trust him, and here he was suggesting she let him touch her. "Or I can give you the bandages and you can do it yourself," he offered. "Whatever makes you comfortable." Relief flashed across her face. "I can do it myself. Thank you." Blake nodded and retrieved his medical supplies from the trunk at the foot of his bed. He had a decent collection, having learned field medicine during the war. He handed her the bandages and the small tin of salve his mother had taught him to make from herbs and tallow. "I will turn around," he said. "Give you some privacy." He moved to the other side of the room and busied himself cleaning up the dishes from her meal, keeping his back turned. He could hear the soft sounds of her moving, the hiss of breath when she wrapped her ribs tight. When she told him it was all right to turn around, he saw she had wrapped herself competently and was now applying the salve to the bruises on her arms. "You have done that before," he observed. "My mother was a healer," Fiona said quietly. "She taught me. Taught me about herbs and setting bones and delivering babies." Her voice caught. "She helped everyone in our valley, never asked for payment, just helped because she could. She sounds like a good woman." "She was the best woman," Fiona whispered. "They all were. My father, my mother, my brother Daniel. They were good people and they died for nothing, for water rights, for land, for greed." Blake pulled his chair around so he was sitting closer to her. "Tell me about them," he said. "Not about how they died. Tell me about how they lived." Fiona looked up at him in surprise. "What? You have been living with their deaths for 3 weeks, Blake said. "You have been running and hiding and remembering that night over and over. Tell me something good about them. Tell me something that will make you smile." Fiona was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. Then, slowly, a small smile did touch her lips. "My father could not sing," she said. "He absolutely could not carry a tune to save his life. But every Sunday morning, he would wake us all up singing at the top of his lungs, these old Irish songs his father had taught him. And we would all groan and put pillows over our heads, but we were laughing too, because he knew how terrible he sounded and he did not care one bit." Blake smiled. "He sounds like he had a good sense of humor." "He did," Fiona said, and now she was really smiling, her eyes distant with memory. "And my mother, she would pretend to be so exasperated with him, but you could always see her trying not to laugh. And Daniel, my brother, he had this one freckle right in the middle of his forehead that looked like a star. When he was little, he used to tell people it meant he was magic. She laughed, a sound that was half sob. He was magic. He could gentle any horse, no matter how wild. He had this gift with animals. They loved you very much, Blake said quietly. They did, Fiona agreed. We were not rich, but we were happy. We had a little ranch outside of Circleville in central Utah, 200 acres with a creek running through it. Good water, good grass. My father had filed the claim legally, had all the papers. But there was a man, Vincent Garrett, who wanted our land. He owned the ranch to our south and he wanted to expand. He made my father offers, kept raising the price, but my father did not want to sell. It was our home. Where we buried my grandparents, where I was born. This Vincent Garrett, Blake said. Was he the one who sent the men? Fiona nodded. I recognized one of them, a man named Colby who worked for Garrett. I had seen him in town before, always hanging around Garrett's place. He was the one who shot my father. Blake filed this information away. And you have been running ever since. How did you make it all the way to Colorado? I took one of our horses that first night, Fiona said. Rode hard for 2 days before I had to let him go. He was too recognizable, my father's bay gelding. I was afraid someone would spot him. After that, I walked, hitched rides on wagons when I could, always moving east, trying to put distance between me and Utah. I figured Colorado was far enough, big enough, that I could disappear. You made it over 150 miles on your own with people hunting you, Blake said, shaking his head in amazement. That is not nothing, Fiona. It felt like nothing, she said quietly. It felt like running away, like abandoning them. There was nothing you could have done against armed men, Blake said firmly. You would have died too, and then there would have been no one left to tell their story, no one to remember them, no one to make sure the people who did this answer for it. Fiona looked at him sharply. What do you mean? I mean that eventually, when you are ready, we are going to make sure Vincent Garrett and his men face justice for what they did. We? Fiona asked, her voice small. We, Blake confirmed. You are not alone in this anymore. Tears filled Fiona's eyes again, but these were different from the ones before. Why? She asked again. Why would you do this for me? Blake was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. I told you about my sister, Margaret. She disappeared during the war and I never found her. I have lived with that for 13 years. The not knowing, the wondering if I could have saved her if I had just been there. I cannot change what happened to her, but I can help you. I can make sure you are safe. And maybe, just maybe, I can help you get justice for your family. That is why. Fiona reached out and took his hand, her small, cold fingers wrapping around his larger ones. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you, Blake. Blake felt something shift in his chest at her touch, at the way she said his name. He squeezed her hand gently, then released it, standing up. You need rest, he said, his voice a little rougher than normal. You can take my bed, I will sleep by the fire. I cannot take your bed, Fiona protested. You can and you will, Blake said firmly. You are injured and exhausted. I have slept in worse places than in front of a fire, believe me. Now go on before you fall asleep in that chair. Fiona looked like she wanted to argue more, but exhaustion was clearly winning. She stood slowly, still wrapped in the blanket, and made her way to his bed. It was not much, just a rope frame with a straw mattress and a few wool blankets, but it was clean and dry and warm. She sat down on the edge, then looked over at him. Blake? Yes, if they come here, if Garrett's men somehow track me here, you need to know that I will not let you die for me. I will turn myself over before I let that happen. Blake met her eyes steadily. They are not going to find you here, but if they do, I have faced worse than hired guns. Trust me on that. Now sleep, Fiona. You are safe. She nodded slowly and lay down, pulling the blankets up around her shoulders. Within minutes, her breathing had evened out into the rhythm of deep sleep. Blake watched her for a moment, this brave, broken woman who had stumbled into his life, and he felt something he had not felt in a very long time: purpose. For 3 years he had been living alone on this mountain, hiding from the world, from his memories, from his pain. And now here was someone who needed him, someone he could help. Someone who, in just a few short hours, had already begun to thaw the ice around his heart. He spread his bedroll near the fire and lay down, but sleep did not come easily. He kept thinking about what Fiona had told him about her family, about Vincent Garrett and his men, about justice and revenge and the fine line between them. Finally, he drifted off as the storm raged outside and the woman in his bed slept the sleep of the truly exhausted. When Blake woke the next morning, the storm had passed and weak winter sunlight was filtering through the cabin windows. He lay still for a moment, orienting himself, then remembered. Fiona. He sat up and looked over at his bed. She was still there, still sleeping, her dark hair spread across his pillow. In sleep, some of the tension had left her face, and he could see just how young she really was, how much she had lost. Blake got up quietly and stoked the fire, then put on coffee. The familiar morning routine soothed him. He was measuring out cornmeal for Jonna cakes when he heard her stir. He turned to find her sitting up in bed, looking around the cabin with confusion before her eyes landed on him and memory returned. "Good morning," he said gently. "How did you sleep?" "I do not remember," Fiona said, her voice hoarse. "I just remember lying down and then nothing until now." "What time is it?" "About 9 in the morning. You slept almost 12 hours. Fiona rubbed her face carefully, avoiding the bruised side. "I did not mean to sleep so long." "Your body needed it," Blake said. He poured coffee and brought it to her. "I am making breakfast. Are you hungry?" "Starving," she admitted, taking the coffee gratefully. She sipped it and looked around the cabin more carefully in the daylight. Blake tried to see it through her eyes. It was sparse but well kept. His rifle hung over the door, his coat on its peg. Shelves held supplies and a few books. His few dishes were stacked neatly. It was the home of a man who lived alone and liked order. "You keep a neat house," Fiona observed. "Military habit," Blake said. "I served during the war. Some things stick with you." "Which side?" Fiona asked, then immediately looked embarrassed. "I am sorry, that was rude. It is none of my business." "It is all right," Blake said. "Union. I was at Gettysburg, the wilderness, Appomattox. 4 years of hell, if I am being honest." "My father served too," Fiona said quietly. "Confederate. He was at Shiloh. He never talked about it much, but sometimes I would hear him having nightmares." Blake nodded, understanding. "The war took something from all of us, the ones who fought and the ones who waited at home." He turned back to his cooking, not wanting to dwell on those memories. "How are your ribs this morning?" "Sore, but better for being wrapped," Fiona said. She stood carefully and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered landscape. "It is beautiful here." "It is," Blake agreed. "Harsh but beautiful. These mountains suit me." "You said you have been here 3 years." "That is right. I drifted for a while after the war, could not settle. Then I found this place and something about it felt right, so I built the cabin and stayed." "Do you ever get lonely?" Fiona asked, then caught herself. "I am sorry, I keep asking personal questions." "It is all right," Blake said again. "Yes, I get lonely sometimes, but the solitude is easier than being around people, or it was." He glanced at her, then away. "I am finding I do not mind the company as much as I thought I would." Fiona smiled, a real smile that transformed her face. Blake felt his heart skip a beat. Lord, but she was pretty when she smiled. They ate breakfast together, Jonna cakes with butter and honey and more coffee. Fiona ate slowly but steadily. and Blake was glad to see some color returning to her cheeks. Afterward, he showed her where he kept things in the cabin, made sure she knew she could help herself to whatever she needed. He also gave her some clothes that had belonged to him, a shirt and trousers that would be too big but warmer and more practical than her torn dress. "I need to go check on Buck, my mule, and make sure the barn weathered the storm all right," Blake said. "Will you be all right here for a bit?" Fiona nodded. "Can I help with anything? I feel like I should be doing something to earn my keep." "You are recovering," Blake said firmly. "That is what you should be doing, but if you want something to occupy your time, there is mending that needs doing. I am terrible with a needle." Fiona smiled. "I can do that." Blake bundled up in his heavy coat and headed out into the brilliant morning. The snow was nearly 2 feet deep in places, sparkling like diamonds in the sunlight. He waded through it to the barn, a small, sturdy structure he had built to house Buck and store his tack and tools. The mule greeted him with a soft nicker, and Blake spent some time checking him over, making sure he had food and water. Everything was secure. The barn had held up well. As he worked, Blake's mind kept returning to Fiona, to the story she had told him, to the pain in her eyes, to the strength she had shown. He had meant what he said about helping her get justice, but he knew it would not be easy. Going up against a powerful rancher like Vincent Garrett, a man who thought nothing of murdering an entire family for their land, would be dangerous. But Blake had faced danger before, and something about Fiona made him want to be better, braver than he had been in a long time. When he returned to the cabin, he found Fiona had changed into his spare clothes. The shirt hung on her small frame, and the trousers had to be rolled up several times, but she looked warmer and more comfortable. She had also washed her face and attempted to comb through her tangled hair with her fingers. She was sitting by the fire, working on mending one of his shirts, her needle moving in neat, precise stitches. "You are good at that," Blake observed. "My mother taught me," Fiona said, then her face fell. "I keep forgetting she is gone. I keep thinking of things I want to tell her, things I want to ask her, and then I remember." Blake sat down across from her. "That is natural. It will hurt less with time, though it never stops hurting completely." "Is that how it is with your sister?" "Yes," Blake said quietly. "I still think of her almost every day, still wonder what happened to her, but the sharp edges of the grief have worn down over the years. It becomes something you can carry instead of something that crushes you." They were quiet for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the whisper of thread through fabric. Then Fiona set down her mending and looked at him seriously. "Blake, I have been thinking. I cannot hide here forever. Eventually I need to decide what I am going to do, where I am going to go." "What do you want to do?" Blake asked. "I want to make Garrett pay for what he did," Fiona said, her voice hard. "I want him to face justice, but I do not know how. I am one person, a woman with no money, no influence, no proof beyond my word. Who is going to believe me against a rich rancher?" "More people than you might think," Blake said. "But you are right that we need to be smart about this. We need proof, witnesses, a solid case to take to the law." "We?" Fiona asked softly. "I told you, you are not alone in this," Blake said. "I meant it." Fiona looked at him for a long moment, her green eyes searching his face. "Why are you so good to me?" she asked. "Is it really just because of your sister?" Blake considered the question. Was it just about Margaret? Or was there something more? In the day and a half since he had found Fiona in his root cellar, something had shifted in him. Something had woken up that he thought was long dead. He found himself noticing things about her. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking. The little line that appeared between her eyebrows when she was concentrating on her mending. The sound of her voice, getting stronger as she recovered from her ordeal. The way she met challenges head-on, even when she was terrified. At first, maybe, Blake said honestly. But now, it is because I have not met anyone like you in a long time, Fiona. You are brave and strong and determined, and you deserve someone in your corner. Fiona's cheeks flushed pink and she looked down at her hands. I do not feel brave. I feel scared all the time. Bravery is not the absence of fear, Blake said. It is doing what needs to be done despite the fear, and you have been doing that for 3 weeks straight. With your help, maybe I can keep doing it, Fiona said quietly. She looked up at him again. So what do we do? How do we start building a case against Garrett? Blake leaned back in his chair, thinking. First, you need to heal and regain your strength. Second, we need information. I need to know more about Vincent Garrett, about his operation, about the men who work for him. Third, we need allies. A sheriff or marshal who is honest and willing to listen. Maybe a lawyer. That is a lot, Fiona said. It is, Blake agreed. But we have time. Winter has set in and the snow will keep Garrett's men from searching the high country for a while. You are safe here, Fiona. We can use the winter to plan, to prepare. And when spring comes, we will be ready. Over the following days, a routine developed. Blake would wake early, make coffee, and tend to Buck and the other morning chores. Fiona would sleep a little later, her body still recovering from weeks of privation and stress. They would eat breakfast together, and then Blake would spend the day checking his trap lines, hunting, gathering firewood, doing all the tasks necessary to survive a Colorado winter at high altitude. Fiona would stay in the cabin, mending his clothes, organizing his supplies, cooking meals that were infinitely better than his own rough efforts. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and talk. Blake found himself looking forward to those evenings more and more. Fiona was intelligent and well-read, despite her frontier upbringing. Her mother had taught her to read when she was young, and she had devoured every book she could get her hands on. She had opinions on everything from politics to poetry, and she was not afraid to debate with Blake when they disagreed. He found it refreshing after years of solitude. She challenged him, made him think, made him laugh. He had almost forgotten what it was like to laugh. For her part, Fiona seemed to be healing, both physically and emotionally. The bruises faded, the swelling went down, her ribs stopped hurting so much. She put on a little weight from regular meals. But more than that, the haunted look in her eyes began to ease. She smiled more. She slept without nightmares, or at least without waking screams. The cabin became a sanctuary for her, a place where she could feel safe for the first time in weeks. One evening, about 2 weeks after Blake had found her, they were sitting by the fire as usual. Fiona was reading one of Blake's books, a volume of Wordsworth's poetry, while Blake was oiling his rifle. Outside, another storm was building, the wind beginning to howl through the peaks. "Blake," Fiona said suddenly, looking up from her book, "can I ask you something personal?" "You can ask," Blake said. "I might not answer, but you can ask. Were you ever married, or engaged, before the war, I mean?" Blake set down his rifle and the oiled cloth. "Yes," he said quietly. "Her name was Catherine. We were engaged before I enlisted. She promised to wait for me." "What happened?" Fiona asked gently. "She did not wait," Blake said with a sad smile. "I do not blame her. 4 years is a long time, and I was a different man when I came back. Harder, quieter, haunted. She had married a shopkeeper from the next town over by the time I returned. Last I heard, they had 3 children and were happy." "That must have hurt," Fiona said. "It did at the time," Blake admitted. "But looking back, I think she made the right choice. I was not fit to be anyone's husband when I came back from the war. Maybe I still am not." He looked at Fiona. "What about you? Was there someone?" Fiona shook her head. "There was a boy in town who was sweet on me. Thomas Graham. He wanted to court me properly, asked my father for permission and everything. but I did not feel the same way about him. I liked him well enough, but there was no spark, no fire. My mother said I was too particular, that I was waiting for some storybook romance that did not exist in real life. She smiled sadly. Maybe she was right. Maybe not, Blake said. Maybe you were just waiting for the right person. Their eyes met across the fire and something passed between them. Something neither of them was quite ready to name yet, but that was there nonetheless, warm and growing. Fiona looked away first, her cheeks flushed. I should probably sleep, she said, standing. It is late. Fiona, Blake said, and she turned back. I am glad you are here. I know the circumstances were terrible, but I am glad you found your way to my root cellar. Fiona smiled, a real smile that made her whole face light up. I am glad too, Blake. Good night. Good night. Blake lay awake for a long time that night, listening to the storm and the sound of Fiona's breathing from across the cabin. He was starting to realize that what he felt for her was more than just protectiveness, more than just sympathy for what she had endured. He was starting to care for her in a way that both exhilarated and terrified him. He had been alone for so long, had built walls around his heart so high and thick that he thought nothing could penetrate them. But somehow, this brave, broken woman was finding her way through, brick by brick. The days grew shorter as December approached. Blake and Fiona settled into their life together with surprising ease. They learned each other's rhythms, each other's moods. Blake discovered that Fiona was not a morning person and needed at least 2 cups of coffee before she was ready for conversation. Fiona learned that Blake got restless if he stayed inside too long and needed to be out in the wilderness regularly, even in terrible weather. They developed their own language of small gestures and shared glances. One morning, Blake woke to find snow falling softly outside, the kind of gentle snow that transformed the world into something magical. He made coffee as usual, but instead of just leaving a cup for Fiona, he brought it to her. Fiona, he said softly, touching her shoulder gently. Wake up, I want to show you something. She stirred and opened her eyes, looking confused for a moment before focusing on him. What is it? You will see. Come on. Fiona sat up and took the coffee, sipping it while Blake fetched her boots and the heavy coat he had given her. She dressed quickly, curiosity overcoming her usual morning sluggishness. Blake led her outside onto the porch. The world was transformed. The new snow had covered everything in a blanket of white so pure it almost hurt to look at. The storm clouds had passed, and the sky was a brilliant blue. Icicles hung from the porch roof, catching the light and throwing tiny rainbows. The peaks in the distance were sharp and clear against the sky. Oh, Fiona breathed. Oh, Blake, it is beautiful. I thought you might like it, Blake said, watching her face instead of the view. The wonder in her expression was worth getting up early for. They stood there together in companionable silence, sipping their coffee and watching the snow fall. After a while, Fiona said quietly, Thank you. For what? For showing me this. For reminding me that there is still beauty in the world. I had almost forgotten. Blake felt a tightness in his chest. Without thinking too much about it, he reached out and took her hand. She looked up at him in surprise, but she did not pull away. Instead, she threaded her fingers through his and squeezed gently. You are welcome, Blake said, his voice a little rough. They stood like that for a long time, hands linked, watching the snow fall and the world wake up around them. And Blake realized that for the first time in years, he felt something like happiness. Christmas came, though they did not celebrate it much. Blake had never been one for holidays, living alone, and Fiona was still too raw from losing her family. But Blake did manage to shoot a wild turkey, and Fiona roasted it with herbs she found in his stores. They ate well, and Blake even broke out a bottle of whiskey he had been saving. They each had a small glass by the fire. To absent friends and family, Blake said, raising his glass. To absent friends and family, Fiona echoed, her eyes bright with unshed tears. And to new ones. They clinked their tin cups together and drank. The whiskey burned going down, warming Blake from the inside. He watched Fiona cough a little at the strength of it and smiled. "Not much of a drinker?" he asked. "My father let me have sips of his whiskey sometimes," Fiona said, "but I never liked it much. Tonight, though, it seems right." They talked late into the night, the whiskey loosening their tongues. Fiona told Blake about growing up in Utah, about learning to ride before she could walk, about helping her mother deliver babies and set bones. Blake told her about his childhood in Missouri, about his parents' farm, about Margaret, and how she used to make him play tea party with her dolls. They talked about their dreams, the ones they had before the war, before loss and grief had reshaped them. "I wanted to be a teacher," Fiona said. "I wanted to open a school, teach children to read and write and think for themselves. My mother said it was a fine ambition for a woman." "You would be a good teacher," Blake said. "You are patient and smart and good at explaining things. What about you? What did you want to be?" Blake was quiet for a moment. "I wanted to be a carpenter. I loved working with wood, building things. I thought I would apprentice with my uncle, learn the trade properly, maybe have my own shop someday." He gestured around the cabin. "This is the only thing I have built since the war." "It is a good cabin," Fiona said. "Solid and warm and well made. You should be proud of it." "I suppose I am," Blake said. "But sometimes I wonder what I might have built if the war had not happened, what kind of life I might have had." "We all wonder that," Fiona said softly. "About the lives we might have lived if things had been different." Blake looked at her across the fire, this woman who had stumbled into his life and changed everything. "Do you ever think about the future?" he asked. "About what you want to do when all this is over, when Garrett has been brought to justice?" Fiona was quiet for a long time. "I try not to," she admitted. "It feels like tempting fate to make plans. But sometimes, yes, I think about it. I think about maybe opening that school somewhere far from Utah, somewhere I can start fresh. I think about having a home again, a place that is mine. I think about—" She trailed off, not finishing the thought. "About what?" Blake prompted gently. Fiona met his eyes. "About not being alone anymore," she said quietly. "About having someone to share my life with. Someone who understands what I have been through, who does not expect me to be someone I am not. Someone kind and strong and steady." Blake's heart was pounding. He knew they were venturing into dangerous territory, but he could not seem to stop himself. "I think about those things too," he said. "I have been alone for a long time, Fiona. I thought I wanted it that way. But having you here these past weeks, I have realized how much I was just existing, not living. You have made me want things again, want more than just getting through each day." "Blake," Fiona whispered, and there was a question in her voice. Blake set down his cup and moved around the fire to sit beside her. "I know the timing is terrible," he said. "I know you are still healing, still grieving. And I know I am just some mountain hermit who probably has no business feeling what I am feeling. But Fiona, I cannot pretend anymore that you are just someone I am helping. You have become so much more than that to me." Fiona reached up and touched his face, her fingers gentle against his bearded cheek. "You are not just some mountain hermit to me either," she said. "You are the man who saved my life, who gave me shelter when I had nowhere to go, who made me feel safe when I thought I would never feel safe again, who made me laugh and think and hope. Blake, I do not know what the future holds, but I know that I want you in it." Blake leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, but she did not pull away. Instead, she met him halfway and their lips touched softly, tentatively. The kiss was gentle and sweet, tasting of whiskey and hope. When they pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "I am sorry," Blake said. I should not have done that." "Why not?" Fiona asked, a small smile playing at her lips. "Because you are vulnerable and I am taking advantage, and it is not right." "Blake Irons," Fiona said firmly. "I am a grown woman who has survived things that would break most people. I know my own mind and my own heart. If I did not want you to kiss me, I would not have let you. Now stop apologizing and kiss me again." Blake could not help but smile at her directness. "Yes, madam," he said, and this time when he kissed her, it was less tentative, more sure. Fiona's arms came up around his neck and his hands settled on her waist, and for a long moment they just held each other, kissing by firelight while the snow fell outside. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were flushed and smiling. Blake rested his forehead against Fiona's, savoring her closeness. "This changes things," he said quietly. "Yes," Fiona agreed. "It does. Is that all right?" "It is more than all right," Blake said. "It is wonderful and terrifying in equal measure." Fiona laughed. "That is a good description. Blake, I do not expect anything from you. I do not expect promises or declarations. I just want to see where this goes, wherever that might be." "I can do that," Blake said. He kissed her forehead gently. "But Fiona, you should know that I do not do things halfway. If we are doing this, if we are exploring this thing between us, then I am all in. Completely." "So am I," Fiona said. "Completely." They sat together by the fire for a long time after that, Fiona leaning against Blake's shoulder, his arm around her. They did not talk much, just enjoyed being close, being together. Eventually, Fiona started to doze off, and Blake carefully picked her up and carried her to the bed. She protested sleepily, saying she could walk, but he just shushed her gently and tucked her in. "Stay," she murmured, her eyes already closing. "Please, Blake, I do not want to sleep alone tonight." Blake hesitated for only a moment before kicking off his boots and climbing into bed beside her, on top of the blankets to maintain some propriety. Fiona immediately curled into his side, her head on his chest, her arm across his waist. Blake held her carefully, his heart full of emotions he could barely name. This woman, this brave, beautiful woman, trusted him enough to sleep in his arms. It was a gift he did not take lightly. The winter deepened, and with it, Blake and Fiona's relationship grew. They were careful with each other, both of them aware of how fragile new love could be, how easily it could be broken by the wrong word or action. But they were also open with each other in a way neither of them had experienced before. They talked about everything, their pasts, their fears, their hopes for the future. They learned to read each other's moods, to give space when it was needed and comfort when that was wanted instead. Blake found himself transformed by loving Fiona. The darkness that had lived in him for so long, the weight of war and loss and loneliness, began to lift. He smiled more, laughed more, engaged with life in a way he had not since before the war. Fiona brought light into his cabin and his heart, and he marveled at it daily. For Fiona, Blake was an anchor in the storm. He was steady and strong and reliable in a world that had proven itself chaotic and cruel. She trusted him completely, and that trust allowed her to heal in ways she had not thought possible. The nightmares that had plagued her began to fade. The constant fear that had lived in her chest since the night her family died began to ease. In Blake's arms, she felt safe enough to grieve properly, to cry for what she had lost, and then to begin to hope again. They still slept separately most nights, Blake on his bedroll by the fire and Fiona in the bed. But there were nights when the loneliness or the nightmares were too much, and they would sleep curled together, finding comfort in closeness. They were careful to maintain boundaries, both of them aware that rushing physical intimacy before they were ready would only complicate things. But the emotional intimacy they shared was deep and real, and it sustained them through the long, dark winter. One evening in late January, as they sat by the fire after supper, Fiona brought up the subject they had mostly avoided since Christmas. "Spring will come eventually," she said quietly. "And when it does, we need to be ready. We need to have a plan for going after Garrett." Blake nodded. He had been thinking the same thing. "I have been considering our options. We need to go to the law, but we need to be smart about it. Garrett likely has influence in Utah, maybe even owns the local sheriff. We need to find someone beyond his reach." "A federal marshal," Fiona suggested. "Someone whose jurisdiction covers the whole territory." "That is a good idea," Blake said. "There is a marshal based in Denver. I met him once years ago. His name is Sam Brennan, and he seemed like an honest man. If we can get to Denver and present our case to him, he might be willing to investigate." "But we still need proof," Fiona said. "My word alone is not enough." "No, but it is a start," Blake said. "And if Brennan investigates, he might find more witnesses who were too scared to speak up before. Records of other acts of violence. A man like Garrett does not get to where he is by being a saint. There will be a trail." Fiona was quiet for a moment. "Going to Denver means leaving here, leaving this cabin, this safety. It scares me, Blake." Blake reached over and took her hand. "I know. But you cannot hide forever, Fiona. Eventually, you have to reclaim your life, and I will be with you every step of the way, I promise. What if they catch us? What if Garrett's men are still looking and they find us on the road? Then I will protect you," Blake said simply. "I am a good shot, Fiona, and I have been in tight spots before. I will not let anyone hurt you." Fiona squeezed his hand. "I know you will try. But Blake, I could not bear it if something happened to you because of me. If you got hurt or worse trying to protect me, I would never forgive myself." Blake pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her. "Listen to me," he said firmly. "You are not responsible for other people's evil. Garrett and his men made their choices. If they come after you again, if they try to hurt you, and if I have to fight them, that is my choice. My decision. Not your fault. Do you understand?" Fiona buried her face in his chest. "I understand, but I am still scared." "Being scared is healthy," Blake said, stroking her hair. "It keeps you alert, keeps you careful, but we cannot let fear control us. We have to be smart, prepared, but also brave enough to do what needs to be done." They held each other for a long time, drawing strength from each other's presence. Finally, Fiona pulled back and looked up at Blake. "All right," she said. "We will go to Denver when the snow melts. We will find this marshal and tell him what happened, and we will see justice done for my family." "Together," Blake said. "Together," Fiona agreed. February passed slowly, the days gradually growing longer even as the cold persisted. Blake and Fiona used the time to prepare. Blake checked and rechecked his weapons, made sure his ammunition was dry and ready. He also began teaching Fiona to shoot, starting with his lighter revolver. She was a quick study, her hand steady, her eye good. Within a few weeks, she could hit a target at 20 paces more often than not. "My father taught me the basics when I was young," she explained after a particularly good session. "But we only had one rifle and Daniel was better at it, so I never practiced much. Turns out it is like riding a horse. You do not really forget." Blake was impressed and said so. Having Fiona able to defend herself gave him some peace of mind. He did not intend for her to be in danger, but the frontier was unpredictable. It was better to be prepared. They also talked through their plans in detail. They would leave in April, when the worst of the snow had melted, but before the spring rains made the trails impassable. They would take Buck and travel light, sticking to less used trails to minimize the chance of running into anyone who might recognize Fiona. Denver was about 70 miles northeast of Fairplay, a journey of perhaps 4 or 5 days given the terrain and conditions. Once there, they would find Marshal Brennan and present their case. What if he does not believe me? Fiona asked one night. Then we find someone who will, Blake said. But I think he will listen at least. And that is all we need, Fiona. Someone in authority who will listen and investigate. The truth has a way of coming out when people start looking for it. As March arrived and the first hints of spring began to show, Blake noticed a change in Fiona. She was stronger now, both physically and emotionally. The hollowness in her cheeks had filled out, the shadows under her eyes had faded, and there was a determination in her bearing that had not been there before. She was ready, he realized. Ready to face what came next, ready to fight for justice, ready to reclaim her life. One evening, as they were finishing supper, Fiona looked at Blake seriously. "I need to tell you something," she said. Blake felt a flutter of concern. "What is it?" "I have been thinking about what happens after," Fiona said. "After we go to Denver, after we hopefully get Garrett arrested and tried. I have been thinking about where I go from there, what I do with my life." "And," Blake prompted, not sure where this was going. "And I realized that I do not want to go back to Utah. There is nothing there for me anymore. My family is gone, my home is gone. It would just be painful memories." She paused, then continued. "But I also realized that I have built a new home here, with you, in this cabin on this mountain. Blake, I know we have not known each other that long, and I know things between us are still new, but I have to ask. When this is all over, can I come back here? Can I stay with you?" Blake felt something expand in his chest, something warm and bright and overwhelming. He reached across the table and took both of her hands in his. "Fiona, you can stay as long as you want, forever if that is what you want. This cabin stopped feeling like just mine the moment you arrived. It is ours now if you will have it, if you will have me." Tears filled Fiona's eyes. "Are you sure? You have been alone for so long. What if you get tired of me? What if you regret this?" "I will never regret this," Blake said with absolute certainty. "Fiona, you have given me my life back. You have given me a reason to wake up in the morning, a reason to plan for the future. I love you. I should have said it before now, but I was afraid of rushing you, of overwhelming you. But I love you, and I want you in my life, in whatever capacity you are comfortable with." Fiona was crying openly now, but she was smiling too. "I love you too, Blake. I think I have loved you since that first night when you found me in your root cellar, and you were so gentle, so kind, when you had every right to be angry at finding a stranger hiding on your property. You made me feel safe when I thought I would never feel safe again. You made me feel human when I had been living like an animal. You made me feel loved when I had lost everyone who ever loved me. Of course I love you." Blake stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight while she cried. These were happy tears, healing tears, and he let her cry them out while he just held her and stroked her hair and whispered how much he loved her. When she finally stopped crying, she looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes and a brilliant smile. "So we have a plan then. We go to Denver, we get justice for my family, and then we come home. Here, together." "Together," Blake agreed. "Always together from now on." That night they lay in bed together, wrapped in each other's arms, and talked about the future. Not the immediate future of the journey to Denver and the confrontation with Garrett's crimes, but the distant future. The future where they were together, building a life. "I want to expand the cabin," Blake said. "Add a room or two. Maybe a proper bedroom and a room where you could have your school if you still want to teach." "A school up here?" Fiona asked, surprised. "Well, maybe not full-time," Blake admitted. "But there are mining camps scattered through these mountains, and miners have families, children who need educating. You could travel to them, teach in the camps, or they could come here during the summer months." Fiona smiled. "I like that idea. What about you? Would you go back to carpentry?" "Maybe," Blake said. "I could make furniture, sell it in Fairplay or Denver. There is always a market for good, solid furniture, and I enjoy the work, or I used to. We could have a good life here, Fiona said softly. A simple life, but a good one. The best life, Blake agreed. Because we will be living it together. They talked until late into the night, making plans, dreaming dreams, building a future in words and hopes. And when they finally fell asleep, they slept peacefully, wrapped in each other's arms and each other's love. April arrived with a rush of melting snow and budding trees. The world came alive again after the long winter, and Blake and Fiona prepared for their journey. Blake packed carefully, making sure they had enough supplies but not so much that they would be weighted down. Food, ammunition, bedrolls, cooking gear, a small tent in case they could not find shelter. He also packed the tin box where he kept his savings, nearly $300 in gold and silver coins. It was everything he had in the world, but he wanted it with him in case they needed it. The night before they were to leave, neither of them could sleep. They lay in bed together, listening to the wind in the pines, and talked quietly. "Are you scared?" Fiona asked. "A little," Blake admitted. "Not of the journey itself or of confronting Garrett's crimes. I am scared of losing you. Of something happening that takes you away from me." "I am scared of the same thing," Fiona said. "Scared of losing you, scared of losing this happiness we have found. But Blake, we cannot let fear stop us. We have to do this." "I know," Blake said. "And we will, together." "Together," Fiona echoed. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Blake, if something does happen to me, if Garrett's men somehow find us, if things go wrong, I want you to know that these past months with you have been the happiest of my life. You gave me hope when I had none. You gave me love when I thought I would never love again. Whatever happens, I will never regret this time with you." Blake pulled her closer, his throat tight with emotion. "Nothing is going to happen to you," he said fiercely. "I will not allow it. But Fiona, if something happens to me, if I cannot protect you the way I want to, you have to promise me you will keep going. You will keep fighting. You will live your life fully and completely, and you will not waste a moment of it mourning me. Promise me." "I cannot promise that," Fiona said, her voice breaking. "If I lose you, Blake, I do not know if I could keep going." "You could and you would," Blake said firmly. "You are the strongest person I have ever met, Fiona. You survived losing your entire family, survived 3 weeks on your own being hunted, survived grief and trauma that would have destroyed most people. If you can survive all that, you can survive anything. Promise me." Fiona was crying now. "All right," she whispered. "I promise. But only if you promise me the same thing. If something happens to me, you will not retreat back into yourself. You will not hide up here on this mountain and cut yourself off from the world. You will keep living." "I promise," Blake said, though he had no idea how he would keep such a promise if he lost her. She had become essential to him, as necessary as air or water. But he would promise her anything she asked. They held each other through the night, neither sleeping much, both drawing strength and comfort from the other's presence. When dawn came, pale and cool, they rose and prepared for their journey. Blake saddled Buck and loaded their supplies while Fiona packed the last of the food and made sure the cabin was secure. They were leaving it for at least 2 weeks, possibly longer, and Blake wanted to make sure it would be safe from animals or weather while they were gone. He banked the fire carefully and latched all the shutters. When everything was ready, they stood together on the porch, looking at the cabin that had been their sanctuary through the long winter. "We will be back," Fiona said, as if reassuring herself. "We will," Blake agreed. "This is our home now. We are just leaving for a little while." They set off as the sun was fully rising, Blake leading Buck with Fiona riding. She was a skilled rider, comfortable in the saddle, and Blake was glad he would not have to worry about her on that front at least. They took the trail down from the high country, following paths Blake knew well. The going was slow at first, the ground still muddy with snowmelt, but it improved as they descended. They traveled in silence for the most part, both of them alert, watching the trail ahead and the forest around them. Blake had his rifle across his saddle, ready if needed. But the first day passed without incident, and that night they made camp in a sheltered hollow by a stream. Blake built a small fire for cooking and warmth, and they ate beans and cornbread while the stars came out overhead. "It is strange to be out in the world again," Fiona said, staring up at the stars. "I spent so long hiding, being afraid to be seen. Even the trip to your cabin, I only traveled at night, always hiding. But this, traveling openly, it feels different." "You are not alone this time," Blake said. "That makes all the difference." "It does," Fiona agreed. She looked over at him. "Blake, no matter what happens in Denver, I want you to know that I trust you completely. I trust your judgment, your strength, your goodness. I am not afraid as long as I am with you." Blake felt his chest tighten with love for this woman. "I will do everything in my power to keep you safe and to get you justice," he promised. "Everything." They slept that night in their small tent, curled together for warmth. Blake woke several times, listening to the sounds of the forest, making sure there was nothing threatening nearby. But all was quiet except for the whisper of wind in the trees and the burble of the stream. The next 3 days passed in much the same way. They traveled during the day, following trails that wound through forests and meadows still brown from winter, but showing the first hints of spring green. They saw almost no one, just a couple of prospectors heading into the mountains and a family in a wagon traveling in the opposite direction. No one paid them much attention, just exchanged nods and brief pleasantries before moving on. On the evening of the 4th day, they crested a rise and saw Denver spread out below them. It was not a large city by Eastern standards, but after months in the wilderness, it looked enormous to Fiona. Wooden buildings lined wide dirt streets. There were shops and hotels, saloons and churches, corrals full of horses and cattle. Smoke rose from dozens of chimneys. The sounds of civilization, voices and hammers and the rumble of wagon wheels drifted up to them. "There it is," Blake said. "Denver." Fiona took a deep breath. "This is it then. This is where we find out if anyone will listen." "Someone will listen," Blake said confidently. "Marshal Brennan is a good man. He will hear you out." They rode down into the city as the sun was setting. Blake found a modest hotel and paid for a room. The proprietor, a heavy-set woman with kind eyes, showed them to a small but clean space with a real bed and a window overlooking the street. "There is a bathhouse 2 doors down if you want to clean up," she offered. "And supper is served in the dining room until 8. Blake thanked her and she left them alone. Fiona sank down onto the bed, looking overwhelmed. "There are so many people," she said. "So much noise. I had forgotten what cities were like." Blake sat beside her and took her hand. "We do not have to do this all at once. We can rest tonight, get cleaned up, have a good meal. We will find Marshal Brennan tomorrow." Fiona nodded. "That sounds good. I think I would like that bath. I must look like something the cat dragged in." Blake smiled. "You look beautiful, but a bath might feel good after 4 days on the trail." They took turns in the bathhouse, luxuriating in the hot water and soap. Fiona washed her hair and Blake shaved his beard down to something more manageable. When they met back in their room, they looked at each other and laughed. They both looked more civilized, less like wild mountain dwellers. They had supper in the hotel dining room, a surprisingly good meal of roast chicken and vegetables. Blake noticed Fiona relaxing a little, the food and the bath, and the sense of progress easing some of her tension. After supper, they walked around the town a little, getting their bearings. Blake pointed out the marshal's office, closed for the night, and they made note of where it was so they could find it easily in the morning. Back in their room, they lay in the real bed, softer than Blake's cabin bed, and talked quietly. "Tomorrow changes everything," Fiona said. "Once I tell Marshal Brennan what happened, once we set this in motion, there is no going back." "You want to go back?" Blake asked. "No," Fiona said firmly. "I want justice for my family. I want Garrett to pay for what he did. I am just nervous." "That is understandable," Blake said. "But you are not facing this alone. I will be right there with you." "I know," Fiona said. She turned to face him. "Blake, whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that I love you. I love you more than I have ever loved anyone." "I love you too," Blake said, cupping her face gently. "More than I can express." They kissed, a long, slow kiss that conveyed everything they felt for each other. When they pulled apart, Fiona rested her head on Blake's chest, listening to his heartbeat. "We should sleep," she murmured. "Big day tomorrow, big day," Blake agreed. But he lay awake long after Fiona's breathing evened out into sleep, thinking about tomorrow, about Marshal Brennan, about Vincent Garrett and justice and the future. He prayed silently that everything would work out, that they would find the help they needed, that Fiona would get the justice she deserved. And he prayed that they would both get to go home to their cabin in the mountains and live the life they had planned. Morning came too quickly. Blake woke early out of habit and lay watching the light strengthen in the window. Beside him, Fiona stirred and opened her eyes. "Good morning," Blake said softly. "Good morning," Fiona replied. "Is it time?" "Soon," Blake said. "Let us get some breakfast first, make sure we are thinking clearly." They dressed carefully, Fiona in her cleanest dress and Blake in the one good shirt he owned. They had breakfast in the dining room, though neither of them had much appetite. When they could delay no longer, they walked the few blocks to the marshal's office. It was a solid brick building with a jail in the back. Blake knocked on the door and a voice called out to enter. They stepped inside to find a man sitting behind a desk, writing in a ledger. He looked up and Blake recognized him immediately. "Marshal Brennan," Blake said. "I do not know if you remember me, Blake Irons. We met about 5 years ago in Fairplay." Brennan squinted at him, then his face cleared. "I do remember. You helped me track that gang of horse thieves. Good tracking, as I recall." He stood and shook Blake's hand, then looked at Fiona curiously. "Who is this?" "This is Fiona Graham," Blake said. "She has a story you need to hear, a story about murder and land theft and corruption in Utah." Brennan's expression grew serious. "All right, sit down and tell me everything." For the next hour, Fiona told her story. She started from the beginning, from the day Vincent Garrett first approached her father about buying their land. She told about the escalating threats, the tension, and then that terrible night when Garrett's men came and murdered her family. She told about recognizing Colby, one of Garrett's men, as the one who pulled the trigger. She told about her 3 weeks on the run, about finding Blake's cabin, about everything. Brennan listened carefully, taking notes, asking questions when he needed clarification. When Fiona finished, he sat back and was quiet for a long moment. "That is a serious accusation," he finally said. "Murder, conspiracy to commit murder, illegal seizure of land. If what you are saying is true, Vincent Garrett is looking at hanging." "It is true," Fiona said firmly. "Every word." "I believe you," Brennan said. "The question is proving it. Your testimony is important, but we need more. We need witnesses, evidence, something that ties Garrett directly to the murders." "What about the land itself?" Blake asked. "If Garrett took possession of the Graham property illegally, there must be records. Deeds claims, something that would show his involvement." Brennan nodded slowly. "That is a good point. I can send a telegram to the land office in Salt Lake City, request copies of any transactions involving the Graham property. If Garrett filed a claim on it after the murders, That would be very suspicious. What about other victims? Fiona asked. Blake said a man like Garrett does not get to where he is by being a saint. If he killed my family for our land, he might have done it to others. Another good point, Brennan said. I can reach out to law enforcement in Utah, see if there have been other suspicious deaths or disappearances connected to Garrett or his men. He looked at Fiona seriously. But Miss Graham, you need to understand that this is going to take time. Weeks, maybe months. I believe your story and I will investigate, but I cannot just ride into Utah and arrest a powerful rancher on the say-so of one witness, no matter how credible. Fiona's face fell. Months. I cannot hide for months. You do not have to hide, Brennan said. You can stay here in Denver. I will make sure you are safe. Or better yet, stay where you have been staying. Blake's cabin, was it? If Garrett does not know you are there, it is probably safer than anywhere in the city. Blake nodded. We can do that. We will go back to the cabin, wait while you investigate. You can send word when you need us. Brennan stood and shook both their hands. I will start today. I will send those telegrams, start asking questions. This will not be quick, but I promise you I will be thorough. Justice may be slow, but it will come. Fiona blinked back tears. Thank you, Marshal. Thank you for listening. It is my job, Brennan said kindly. But more than that, it is the right thing to do. No one should get away with what was done to your family. They left the marshal's office feeling a complex mix of emotions. Relief that Brennan had believed them and was willing to investigate. Frustration that it would take so long. Hope that justice might actually be served. Fear that something could still go wrong. We did it, Fiona said as they walked back to the hotel. We actually did it. Someone in authority knows what happened. Someone is going to investigate. We did, Blake agreed. You were so brave in there, Fiona. I am proud of you. I could not have done it without you, Fiona said, taking his hand. Without you believing in me, supporting me, giving me the strength to face this. They spent one more night in Denver, and the next morning they began the journey back to the cabin. The return trip felt different from the trip down. There was less tension, less fear, more hope. They took their time, enjoying the spring weather, the wildflowers beginning to bloom, the sound of birds returning from their winter homes. When they finally crested the rise and saw the cabin nestled in its clearing, both of them felt a rush of emotion. This was home. This was where they belonged. They settled back into their routine easily, as if they had never left. Blake resumed checking his trap lines and hunting. Fiona resumed cooking and keeping the cabin. But there was a new dimension to their life now. They knew they were waiting, that eventually word would come from Marshal Brennan, that eventually they would have to face what came next. But in the meantime, they had each other and their mountain and their love. One evening in early May, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Blake turned to Fiona. "Marry me," he said simply. Fiona looked at him in surprise. "What? Marry me?" Blake repeated. "I know we have only known each other since November, but I know my heart. I love you, Fiona. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to make this official, make you my wife in the eyes of God and the law. Marry me." Fiona's eyes filled with tears. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Blake, I will marry you." Blake pulled her into his arms and kissed her thoroughly. When they pulled apart, both of them were laughing and crying at the same time. "When?" Fiona asked. "How?" "There is a circuit preacher who comes through Fairplay every few weeks," Blake said. "We can go down to town, find out when he is next due, have him perform the ceremony. It does not have to be fancy. Just you and me and our vows." "That sounds perfect," Fiona said. "Absolutely perfect." They went to Fairplay the next week and discovered the circuit preacher was due in 3 days. They spent those 3 days preparing. Blake bought a simple gold band from the general store. Fiona made herself a new dress from fabric Blake insisted on purchasing, a soft blue that brought out her eyes. They were both nervous and excited, like children waiting for Christmas. The day of the wedding dawned clear and beautiful. They dressed in their best clothes and walked to the small church at the edge of Fairplay. The circuit preacher, an elderly man named Reverend Thomas, met them there. There were no other guests, just the three of them and the church caretaker who served as witness. The ceremony was simple and brief, but every word felt weighted with meaning to Blake. When he slipped the ring onto Fiona's finger and promised to love and cherish her for the rest of his days, he meant it with every fiber of his being. When Fiona made her vows, her voice steady and her eyes locked on his, Blake felt his heart swell with such love he thought it might burst. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Thomas said with a warm smile. "You may kiss your bride." Blake cupped Fiona's face in his hands and kissed her gently, reverently. She was his wife now, his partner, his love, his life. They walked back to where they had left Buck and rode back up to their cabin as the sun was setting. That night, they celebrated their marriage in the privacy of their home, finally giving in to the passion they had held in check for months. They came together with tenderness and love, learning each other's bodies, giving and receiving pleasure. And afterward they lay tangled together, spent and happy. "I love you, Mrs. Irons," Blake murmured into Fiona's hair. "I love you too, Mr. Irons," Fiona replied with a smile. More than words can say. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Blake's life. He and Fiona settled into married life with ease, their existing companionship deepening into something even more profound. They worked together, played together, loved together. Blake began work on expanding the cabin, adding a proper bedroom as he had promised. Fiona started a small garden, planting vegetables and herbs. They built a life together, day by day, moment by moment. In late June, a rider came up to the cabin. Blake saw him coming from a distance and immediately went on alert, but the man wore a badge and carried himself like law. It was one of Marshal Brennan's deputies with a letter. Blake tore it open and read quickly, then let out a whoop of joy. Fiona came running from the garden. "What is it? What happened?" "Brennan did it," Blake said, grinning. "He found evidence. Land records showing Garrett filed a claim on your family's property the day after the murders. Witness testimony from other ranchers who said Garrett had threatened them too. One of Garrett's men, a fellow named Jackson, turned on him and confessed to being there the night your family was killed. Brennan has arrested Garrett and the men involved. They are awaiting trial in Salt Lake City." Fiona's hands flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "They arrested him. They really arrested him." "They really did," Blake confirmed. "Justice is coming, Fiona. Your family will be avenged." Fiona threw herself into Blake's arms, sobbing with relief and joy and grief all mixed together. Blake held her tight, his own eyes wet, and thanked God silently for Marshal Brennan and for justice, and for this woman in his arms. The letter also requested that Fiona come to Salt Lake City to testify at the trial. Blake and Fiona discussed it at length and decided they would both go. This time, the journey felt different. They were not running, not hiding. They were riding toward justice. The trial took place in August. Fiona testified, her voice strong and clear as she told the court what had happened to her family. Other witnesses corroborated parts of her story. The man Jackson, facing his own murder charges, admitted that Garrett had ordered the killings. The land records showed Garrett's illegal claim. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a verdict, guilty on all counts. Vincent Garrett and 3 of his men, including Colby, the man who had shot Fiona's father, were sentenced to hang. When the judge read the sentence, Fiona gripped Blake's hand so hard he thought his bones might break, but she did not cry. She simply nodded as if something inside her had finally settled. Outside the courthouse, she turned to Blake. "It is over," she said. "It is really over." "It is," Blake agreed. "Your family has justice. You can rest now." "No," Fiona said, shaking her head. "Not rest, live. I can live now without that weight on my shoulders. I can move forward." They stayed in Salt Lake City long enough to see the sentence carried out. Fiona needed to witness it, needed to see with her own eyes that the men who had destroyed her family faced consequences. Blake stood beside her in the crowd as the 4 men were hanged. He held her hand and felt her shake, but she did not look away. Afterward, they visited the graves of Fiona's family. Blake had arranged for proper headstones to be placed, paid for with some of his savings. Fiona knelt before them and spoke to her parents and brother, telling them that justice had been served, that they could rest now. She told them about Blake, about their marriage, about the life she was building. She promised to honor their memory by living fully and completely. When she stood, her face was wet with tears but peaceful. "I am ready to go home now," she told Blake. "Then let us go home," Blake said. The journey back to Colorado felt like the beginning of a new chapter. They rode slowly, enjoying the late summer weather, stopping to admire views or pick wild berries, or simply sit together in companionable silence. When they finally arrived back at their cabin in early September, it felt like coming home in the deepest sense of the word. The cabin was exactly as they had left it. Blake resumed his work on the addition while Fiona harvested her garden and put up preserves for the winter. They fell back into their rhythm easily, 2 people perfectly in tune with each other one evening in October as the aspens were turning gold and the air held the first real chill of approaching winter. Fiona made an announcement over supper. "Blake," she said, her eyes shining. "I think I am with child." Blake nearly dropped his coffee cup. "You think?" "Really, really," Fiona confirmed, smiling broadly. "I am about 2 months along if my calculations are correct. We are going to have a baby, Blake. Next spring." Blake stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her as gently as if she were made of glass. "A baby," he whispered. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Fiona asked. "Happy," Blake laughed. "Fiona, I am beyond happy. I am ecstatic. I am terrified. I am grateful. I am all the things at once." Fiona laughed too. "That is about how I feel too." They spent the winter preparing for the baby. Blake finished the addition to the cabin and started building a cradle, using all his carpentry skills to make it perfect. Fiona sewed baby clothes and blankets. They argued good-naturedly about names. Blake wanted Margaret if it was a girl, after his sister. Fiona wanted Daniel if it was a boy, after her brother. They finally agreed to both. As winter gave way to spring and Fiona grew round with their child, Blake found himself marveling at the turns life had taken. A year and a half ago, he had been alone on his mountain, existing but not really living. And now he had a wife he loved more than life itself and a baby on the way. He had a home, a purpose, a future full of hope and possibility. In late April, as the wildflowers were beginning to bloom, Fiona went into labor. Blake had arranged for a midwife from Fairplay to come stay with them as Fiona's time drew near, and now he was grateful for her presence. The labor was long and difficult, and Blake spent most of it pacing outside the cabin, listening to Fiona's cries and feeling helpless. Finally, as dawn was breaking, he heard a new sound. A baby's cry, strong and healthy. The midwife opened the door with a huge smile. "Congratulations, Mr. Irons. You have a son." Blake rushed inside to find Fiona propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle. She looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "Meet Daniel Blake Irons," she said. Blake looked down at his son, at the tiny perfect face and the small fists waving, and felt his heart expand to accommodate this new, overwhelming love. "He is beautiful," he whispered. "You are both beautiful." He sat carefully on the edge of the bed and put his arm around Fiona, looking down at their son together. This was his family, his wife, his child, his life. Everything he had never dared to hope for after the war, after loss and grief, had convinced him he was better off alone. "Thank you," he said to Fiona. "Thank you for finding my root cellar. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for this." Fiona leaned her head on his shoulder. "Thank you for being the kind of man who did not turn away a terrified woman hiding in his cellar. Thank you for being patient and kind and good. Thank you for giving me a reason to hope again. Thank you for giving me this family." They sat together like that for a long time, the three of them, as the sun rose over the Colorado mountains and flooded their cabin with golden light. Outside, the world went on, but inside, everything that mattered was right here. In the years that followed, Blake and Fiona built the life they had dreamed of. They had two more children, a daughter they named Margaret Rose, and another son they called William. Fiona started her traveling school, teaching children in the mountain mining camps during the summer months. Blake became known for his fine furniture, which he sold as far away as Denver. Their cabin grew with their family, rooms added as needed, always built with Blake's careful craftsmanship. They never forgot the tragedy that had brought them together. Every year on the anniversary of her family's deaths, Fiona would light candles and tell their children about their grandparents and uncle they would never meet, making sure their memory lived on. And every year on the anniversary of the day Blake found Fiona in his root cellar, they would celebrate privately, marking the day their lives had changed forever. Daniel grew into a serious boy with his mother's green eyes and his father's steady nature. He loved the mountains and animals, just like his namesake uncle had. Margaret was spirited and bright, constantly asking questions and reading every book she could get her hands on. William was the baby, cheerful and easygoing, bringing laughter into every situation. Blake and Fiona grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. There were hard times, of course, winters that were particularly brutal. A year when sickness swept through the mining camps and Fiona worked herself to exhaustion caring for the sick. The time William fell from a tree and broke his arm. But they faced everything together, partners in every sense of the word. On their 20th anniversary, Blake took Fiona back to the spot where he had found her, the root cellar that was still part of their property, though they had built a larger one closer to the expanded cabin. They stood there together, older now but still very much in love. "You ever regret it?" Blake asked. "The life you ended up with. It is not easy living up here, raising children so far from civilization." Fiona looked at him like he had lost his mind. "Regret it? Blake, this life with you is everything I could have hoped for and more. You gave me back my life when I thought it was over. You gave me love and family and purpose. How could I ever regret that? I just want to make sure you are happy," Blake said. "That is all I have ever wanted." "I am happy," Fiona said firmly. "I am more than happy. I am fulfilled. I am loved. I am home." She took his hands in hers. "Blake Irons, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. Finding your root cellar, finding you, was the moment my life truly began." Blake pulled her close and kissed her, a kiss that held 20 years of love and partnership and shared life. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "I love you, Fiona Irons," Blake said. "Today, tomorrow, and for all the rest of our days." "I love you too," Fiona replied. "Always and forever." They walked back to their cabin hand in hand, their children's laughter drifting out to meet them. Inside, the fire was burning warm, supper was cooking, and the life they had built together was waiting. Blake paused at the door and looked back at the mountains that rose all around them, the mountains that had sheltered them, protected them, given them a home. Then he looked at Fiona, at her smile and her eyes and the silver threads beginning to show in her dark hair. She was still the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Ready to go in?" Fiona asked. "Ready," Blake said. And together, they stepped into their home, into the warmth and light and love they had created, closing the door on the past and embracing the future that stretched before them, bright with promise and full of hope. Their story, which had begun with fear and grief, and a desperate woman hiding in a root cellar, had transformed into something beautiful. A testament to the healing power of love, the strength of the human spirit, and the truth that even in our darkest moments, hope can find a way in. And sometimes, just sometimes, that hope comes in the form of a kind stranger who offers shelter, safety, and ultimately, a love that lasts a lifetime. Blake and Fiona lived out their days on that Colorado mountain, growing old together, watching their children grow and have children of their own. They never moved away, never sought any life other than the one they had built together. And when their time finally came, many years later, they were buried side by side on the mountain they had called home, their headstones facing the peaks and the endless sky. Their children and grandchildren told their story for generations. The story of the mountain man who found a woman hiding in his root cellar, of what she said that made him weep, of the love that grew between them, and of the life they built together against all odds. It became a family legend, a reminder that even the darkest circumstances can lead to light, that kindness and compassion can change lives, and that love, when it is real and true, can overcome anything. And on quiet nights, when the wind whispers through the pines and the stars shine bright over the Colorado mountains, some say you can still feel their presence there, in the cabin they built and the land they loved. Two souls so intertwined that not even death could part them, forever home in the wilderness they claimed as their own.